So this is a silver zenyatta on horizon. Now, I've looked over your VOD, and instead of going over some individual things that happen throughout it, I'm going to go over some Zen fundamentals instead, and sort of making sure that you understand these guidelines, I guess, for playing a Zen really will help you, and I think it will help you a lot more than me going over some specific things. So there are three main things that I want you to look at, and the first of these is going to be where to space. Now, Zen always wants to be behind his team, and far back enough that he doesn't take this unnecessary damage from the front line. You know, you really don't want to be in sort of Reinhardt or Zarya range when you're playing with your team. Always try and stick behind them, not necessarily too far back, but far back enough that you don't catch sort of trash damage that you don't need to. Secondly, you also need to be far back enough that you can keep an eye on these flank routes. You see, with how far forward you're playing here, you can't really see this flank route on left side, and quite often on the second point you sort of get caught out unawares because you didn't have the info. Playing in a way that gives you this early info on these flankers coming for you is a really important part of staying alive as Zen. The second thing I want you to think about is going to be your micro positioning. You know, once you know that rough distance that you want to play from your team, you then need to think about where you're actually going to play. And for Zen, this is going to almost always be either on a corner or at a doorway. Playing in these positions that allow you to duck into cover at a moment's notice is really, really good for Zen. You know, he can hide in cover to start regenerating his shields, he can charge his right clicks when he's safe, he can even pop discords on people that are pushing him and then sort of pre-fire them as they come around the corner. Try to always have a piece of cover like this that you can play around, because quite a few times in this VOD you sort of get caught out in the middle of the point. The third thing I want you to think about is awareness, and by awareness what I mostly mean is going to be camera management. Zen has quite a lot of downtime, you know, when he's reloading, when he's charging right clicks, or maybe regenerating his shields, and throughout this time you want to always be looking around, and you need to do this not only to know where your team is, but more importantly know where the enemy team is. Really try and get into the habit of checking around you during each of these tiny little windows of downtime, because as Zen you really need to keep on top of what's actually happening in the fight. Bear in mind that doing one of these things well is going to help you do the other two, and these are skills that Zens all the way up to the highest level are going to be continually improving. So try and actively think about them, because doing these things well will really stop you getting caught out in some of the places you did. All three of those skills sort of deserve their own videos, but the basics are going to be play behind your team, make sure you have lines of sight on the flanks. Find a piece of cover to play around, use it to avoid damage, charge right clicks, and defend yourself from flankers. Finally, make sure you keep looking around every time you charge a right click, every time you reload. Make sure you're actually staying on top of what's going on in the fight. One smaller tip for you as Zen is going to be to keep using these right clicks more. You're pretty good at charging them when there was no one around, but you definitely want to be continually charging these right clicks even if there's no one on your screen. And don't be afraid to sort of let them loose around corners even if you're not going to hit anyone, just to try and put pressure on the people hiding behind. The biggest thing for you overall though is going to be your mechanics. I don't usually like talking about mechanics because not only can it be quite difficult to coach, but it's something that's just going to improve over time anyway. However, for you, there were a few times where you didn't really look confident in your movement. So while I wouldn't really worry too much about your aim at this point, I would definitely try and improve your control over the movements you actually make. Perhaps the easiest way of doing this would just be hopping into practice range as Tracer and trying to track the moving bots while blinking around them. A good warm-up technique is usually trying to blink as close as you can to the bots and then tracking them as they move past you. You don't have to be deleting them with sick aim, but you do have to be getting in control of these dynamic movements which are really missing from your play.